It's Saturday Stockman Stampede, and today I have 3 knives to show you that I've scalloped the covers on. The first one I did was this Oldtimer. This one was in really bad shape. The blades wouldn't open or close, it was rusted shut, and even when you did get the blades to move, there was so much metal worn down and the kicks had been filed down that when the blades closed, since they're thicker by the spine, the thicker part of the blade was trying to go down into the knife itself, and it was thicker than the gap that's between here. So the blades would wedge closed when you tried to push them down in. So in addition to soaking this knife and getting it to work again, I had to grind the blades down and thin out the geometry, and you can see how that's ground down. Same thing on the sheep's foot blade. And what's left of the spade blade, it's now a very nice awl. It's very pointy. It does a great job. I thinned this one out too. Now, one of the things I did is I thinned them out much less on the side with the nail nick. I did thin it below the nail nick a little bit, but I did the majority of the thinning on this side and then redid the bevel on it. So as to remove a little bit of material from the spine. And you can see in here, you can see the step. There's a lot of knives that come with that little step in it, but I did make this one a little bit bigger so that these two blades would clear each other, which they wouldn't do before. Now the knife works beautifully. I actually love this knife. Really nice one to carry. This one was brought back from the trash heap. Now, since this was the first one I scalloped, let's take a look at this a little closer. I used a small metal grinding wheel on the Dremel to do this. It's kind of similar to the sanding drums, but it's a metal wheel with fairly aggressive teeth, and that worked great for doing this. Since it's a small knife, I wanted small scallops on it. This is in the 4-inch class of Stockman, 3 7/8 to 4-inch. I also had to tighten up the bolsters on this and then sand them down and polish them. I didn't clean it up completely. You can see there's still some patina on here. I did sand down the springs a little bit, but like I said, not completely. I wanted to leave some, I guess I'm going to say, the look of age on it. And I didn't want to remove all of the patina. I had to on the blades, on the sides, because I had to regrind them, but I didn't touch the spine. I left the spine alone so you could still see the grayness on it. So I think this turned out really nice. I don't know how well this is going to show up in the camera, but there's still some texture. These covers had a saw cut pattern on them, and that saw cut pattern was fairly aggressive, and it gives these Oldtimers a pretty decent grip. Now on this knife, it was worn almost completely smooth. Right there you can still see some remains of the saw cut pattern in between the scallops. So I wanted that to still be seen, but they were worn so smooth it gave no texture. So I did the scallop pattern and in between leaving these flat so you can still see some of that original saw cut. And I really love the way this turned out. It restored the grip to the knife while still giving you some of the original look at the same time. Now, one thing that most people probably don't realize about Delrin. Delrin is a self-lubricating plastic, and that's, I think, part of the reason why it seems so slippery. Now, years ago when I was in my 20s and my 30s, I used to play a lot of paintball. And one of the things I did, because I had a lathe and a mill, I used to make my own custom parts for paintball guns. And one of the things I did is made Delrin O-rings to replace all of the rubber O-rings inside the marker for any moving parts. That greatly reduced the friction. Now, for example, the marker of the day back then was the autococker, and your bolt was moved back and forth by an external piston that had a regulator on it to regulate the pressure on that piston, so you could control the force and the speed with which the bolt moved. Well, if you replace the rubber O-rings on the bolt with Delrin O-rings, you could drastically lower the pressure on that piston. That would lessen your chances of having a broken paintball while one was loading as the bolt cocked. So it increased the performance of the markers a lot. And that's again due to the self-lubricating properties of Delrin. The second knife I did was this Case 47 pattern. Now this was a knife I got and I considered sending it back. The blade was rubbing on one side, this main blade. It was rubbing hard, but it was also very loose. The pivots were loose. What I found is if I squeezed the knife together hard, the blade would go back to the center and it would be much better. So instead of sending this back and risk getting a much worse knife, because this knife was good outside of that, I chose to keep it and tighten the pivots up myself. So I tightened, sanded, and repolished the bolsters, and the knife turned out beautifully. It was slippery, so I did the same treading on this one as what I did on the Oldtimer. I used the same grinding implement on the Dremel and the same kind of pattern. And I really like this smaller pattern on these smaller Stockman. Again, this one is a 3 7/8. The 47 pattern is a little bit unique because it has 3 springs. It has 1 spring for each blade, which means the blades aren't bent. Each blade runs straight in its own channel. Normally they'll take your spade blade and your sheep's foot and they'll bend them opposite ways because they run in the same channel so that they have clearance and they can slide past each other. But on this, they're all straight. They don't bend them. And you've got your main blade here. So I really like this knife a lot, especially since I added the scallops on it. And the knife that I just did last week, which I showed the process of. By the way, there's videos on both these knives back on my channel. But this is the one that I just did last week. And since this is a larger Stockman, this is a large Rough Rider. This would be the same size as a Case 75 pattern. And this again had yellow Delrin. And it was very smooth and very slippery. Now the knife has some grip to it. It's got a really nice texture. And since this was a larger knife, I went with a large sanding drum on the Dremel tool. And I really like how that pattern turned out. One thing all 3 of these knives have in common is they're all carbon steel. I do prefer carbon steel knives. And you can get these Oldtimers that need some work, or some of these yellow Delrin case knives. You find them on sale from time to time and you can get them for really good prices. This knife I got for $12 and I bought 3 of them. I gave one away and I kept the other 2. I use this one and I keep one brand new one put away as a backup. This Oldtimer I got for either $10 or $12 with free shipping on eBay. And this 47 pattern, I think this was on sale for $40-something and I picked this up. So these are great knives, great prices if you look around, especially with this yellow Delrin. And you do a little customization on it and you end up with an everyday carry that's hard to beat. That's going to be it for this one. We'll see you next time.